Hello, everyone. Welcome to How to Read Chinese Poetry podcast. I'm Zong-qi, the program host. In this podcast program, my colleagues and I aim to introduce cutting-edge scholarship on Chinese poetry to a broad general audience. We will present 52 episodes covering the major poetic genres developed over China's long history. Each episode features close reading of one or more of the best-known Chinese poems, with an aim to illuminate their literary greatness and cultural significance. For all the discussed poems, Chinese text, English translation, romanization, and brief notes are provided at our website, howtoreadchinesepoetry.com. By following the 52 episodes, listener will gain a bird's-eye view of the thematic, formal, and generic evolution of Chinese poetry from antiquity to the modern era. Instruct and delight is what we wish to accomplish in each talk. Without further ado, let's begin. Today, Professor Wu will present the last of 3 episodes for his topic, entitled Spiritual and Imaginary Journeys in Lisao.
Hello everyone, today I'm presenting the final episode on Chu Ci, the lyrics of Chu. In the previous sections, we have seen little movement in the poem under discussion, namely the Lisao or on encountering trouble. What we have seen so far is a long speech or monologue given by the poet. Starting from this section, however, the poet becomes increasingly restless, trying to decide what next step to take. We find him, quote, halted, intending to turn back again, to turn about my chariot and retrace my road before I had advanced too far along the path of folly, unquote. At one point, he, quote, suddenly turned back, unquote, to let his eyes wander and, quote, resolved to go and visit all the world's quarters, unquote. The text is signaling to us that more dramatic passages will follow. In the next section that is omitted here, the poet, as if aware of the difficulty in explaining his situation to a contemporary person, takes his case directly to Chonghua or Shun, one of the most revered legendary sage rulers. He tells Shun that unlike in the past, when justice was rewarded and evil punished, his own time is thoroughly out of order. Then the poet, quote, yoked a team of jade dragons to a phoenix-figured car and waited for the wind to come to soar upon my journey, unquote. What follows is the poem's first heavenly trip, one of the most fantastic sections in the poem. I started out in the morning on my way from Cangwu. By evening, I had arrived at the Hanging Garden. I wanted to stay a while in those fairy precincts, but the swift-moving sun was dipping to the west. I ordered Xihe to stay the sun's steed's gallop, to stand over Yanzi Mountain and not go in, for the road was far and so distant was my journey, and I wanted to go up and down seeking my heart's desire. I watered my dragon steeds at the pool of heaven and tied their reins to the Fusheng tree. I broke a sprig of ruo tree to strike the sun with. I ordered my phoenixes to mount on their pinions and fly ever onward by night and by day. The whirlwinds gathered and came out to meet me, leading clouds and rainbows to give me welcome. In wild confusion, now joined and now parted, upwards and downwards rushed the glittering train. I ordered heaven's porter to open up for me, but he leaned across heaven's gate and eyed me churlishly. The day was getting dark and drawing to its close. Nodding orchids, I waited in indecision. As I noted earlier, spiritual and imaginary journeys or flights are essential components of shamanistic rituals. In order to seek help from the supernatural realm, in finding love, curing the sick, summoning back the dead, obtaining blessings of spirits, etc., the shamans often put on a performance wherein they claim to have departed from their bodies to meet with the spirits. The Lord of the Xiang River, discussed in the first episode, portrays such journeys. What we have in this and other passages of the Lisao seems to be further elaborations on those earlier models. Similar to those failed flights, here the poet is also met with frustration because he's refused the entry to heaven by the heaven's porter. The rich style, fantastic imagery, and the wild imagination of this section were unprecedented in Chinese poetry of Qu Yuan's time. They make the poems in Shi Jing, or the book of poetry, look sober and restrained in comparison. Many critics, such as Wang Yi, try to tame them through allegorical readings. Others find them objectionable. Liu Xie, for example, accuses such writing of being outlandish and regarded it as an aberration from the classics. But it is precisely this feature that constitutes one of Chu Ci's most enduring influences and the greatest contributions to Chinese poetry. Undaunted by his failure to enter heaven, the poet continues his search, but this time he's looking for something different. He turns his attention to the world, only to find it, quote, muddy, impure, and undiscriminating, unquote. Somewhat baffled by his failure so far, the poet decides to seek help from divination. I searched for the holy plant and twigs of bamboo and ordered Ling Fen to make divination for me, he said. Beauty is always bound to find its mate. Who that was truly fair was ever without lovers? Think of the vastness of the wide world. Here is not the only place where you can find your lady. Go farther afield, he said, and do not be faint-hearted. What woman seeking handsome man could ever refuse you? What place on earth does not boast some fragrant flower? Why need you always cleave to your old home? The world today is blinded with its own folly. You cannot make people see the virtue inside you. Master Ling Fen's oracle essentially repeats what Qu Yuan has been saying all along, that he possesses outstanding beauty, but this blinded world simply fails to recognize and appreciate it. He advises Qu Yuan that he should not be too stubborn in the pursuit of his ideals, for if he is flexible in his mind, he will surely find what he wants. This flexible attitude, however, entails giving up the poet's loyalty to his ruler and his attachment to his old home. As we shall see, this is the ultimate sacrifice that the poet is unable to make. It is noteworthy that Ling Fen's oracle is couched in the symbolism established earlier in the poem. The objects of the poet's pursuit are, quote, your lady, unquote, and fragrant flower. What follows is a reflective passage that repeats the main themes and the motifs introduced earlier. His steadfast pursuit of beauty and of virtue, and the rifts this pursuit has caused between him and the world that is bent on self-advancement. Disillusioned, the poet finally decides to heed the counsels of Ling Fen and to, quote, travel around looking both high and low, unquote, for the lady that has eluded him in his previous journeys. This introduces the last shamanistic flight of the poem. Since Ling Fen had given me a favorable oracle, I picked an auspicious day to start my journey on. Harness winged dragons to be my coursers. Let my chariot be of fine work of jade and ivory. How can I live with men whose hearts are strangers to me? I'm going on a far journey to be away from them. I took the way towards the Qu Yuan mountain, a long, long road with many a turning in it. The cloud-embroidered banner flapped its great shade above us, and the jingling jade yoke bells tinkled merrily. I set off at morning from the fort of heaven. At evening, I came to the world's western end. Phoenixes followed me, bearing up my pennants, soaring high with majestic wing beats. My 8 dragon steeds flew on with rising undulations. My cloud-embroidered banners flapped on the wind. But when I had ascended the splendor of the heavens, I suddenly caught a glimpse of my old home. My groom's heart was heavy, and the horses, for longing, arched their heads back and refused to go on. So the purpose of this magnificent journey, the poet informs us, is, quote, to be away from, unquote, the blinded world and its benighted people. For a moment, the poet seems to have done just that. Pulled by his dragon steeds, accompanied by phoenixes and other supernatural creatures, the poet travels much further this time to the extreme far west of the world. At the peak of this dazzling journey, however, just as the poet, quote, had ascended the splendor of the heaven, unquote, he cannot but, quote, suddenly caught a glimpse of his old home, unquote. This seemingly casual act causes the sudden halt and the subsequent collapse of this most fantastic, far-off journey. Despite all the seeming power and the majesty, heavenly trips and the heavenly world they lead to pale in comparison with the poet's old home and his mundane longing for it. These supernatural flights are created to transcend the world and its imperfections, but in the end, they serve only to foreground the poet's stubborn and powerful attachment to it. In other words, the splendid paraphernalia of shamanism is appropriated by the poet to promote a fundamentally humanistic theme, which is his profound engagement with the human world. The last section, which is equivalent to a coda in a musical performance, sums up the theme of the poem. Enough. There are no true men in the state. No one understands me. Why should I cleave to the city of my birth? Since none is worthy to work with in making good government, I shall go and join Peng Xian in the place where he abides. So the poet reiterates his alienation from the world and states again his wish to join Peng Xian in the place where he abides. As indicated earlier, most critics regard this to be the poet's statement of his intention to commit suicide, although some consider it to be the expression of his desire to become a shaman and spend the rest of his life as a recluse. It is important to note that what prompts this act is the poet's realization that in this world, quote, none is worthy to work with in making a good government, unquote. This unequivocally situates the poem in the context of the human world. It also helps to naturalize or render normal the fantastic and unconventional elements of the poem, such as those inspired by shamanism and its rituals. The Lisao, or On Encountering Trouble, is one of the most influential poems in the Chinese tradition. Throughout China's long history, many intellectuals were drawn to it because they often found themselves in similar circumstances as Qu Yuan. This beautiful language and dazzling journeys provided them with momentary relief from the pressing hardship of life. Qu Yuan's repeated ranting against injustice of the world offered a means to vent their own frustrations and anger, especially since in later ages, this often could only be done vicariously through a text. And finally, Qu Yuan's example demonstrated to them that virtue and beauty often go unappreciated, and that they were not alone in their misfortunes, thus making the sufferings of their life more bearable. In sum, Lisao provided both poetic inspiration and catharsis or emotional relief for later generations. This has ensured it a major place in the history of Chinese literature. This is the end of my discussion on Chu Ci. Thank you.
Let us thank Professor Wu for such a stimulating talk. This talk concludes the topic on the lyrics of the Chu. To learn more from Professor Wu on this topic, you may read his chapter on the lyrics of the Chu in our source book, How to Read Chinese Poetry, a Guided Anthology. Next week, we'll get started on another 3 episodes on the lyrics of the Chu. Our guest host will be Martin Kern, Professor of Chinese Literature at the Princeton University.